Hi, my name is Mike Hendrickson. I'm the Associate Publisher at Riley. I'm responsible for most of our content that you see in print and other forms of distribution. And I've been working with the speaker today for about 7 months. And I've got to admit, this is one of the more insightful authors I've had the pleasure to work with in my 20-plus years in publishing. Our speaker is currently at Rubicon Consulting, where she leads a distinguished team of hands-on operational veterans that are working with global corporations such as Hewlett-Packard, Pinnacle, Logitech, OpenWave, Symantec, among others. So I'd like to welcome the founder, CEO, and strategist at Rubicon Consulting, Nilofer Merchant.
Thanks, Mike. It's such a more formal way than you normally address me.
Yes, it is.
Hey, you.
Yeah.
All right, so what I want to do is talk to everyone about MurderBoarding and just a little bit of history about the name as we dive in. So MurderBoarding sounds like such a funny name, and I know a lot of people when they first hear it are like, because there's, we've lived through the Cheney years, and we respond to it as if it's something negative. But really, it came out of this construct that quite often when we're crowdsourcing or whiteboarding or we have just a ton of choices, we don't know how to pick. And more importantly, we don't know how to kill off things so that we can focus on the things that really matter. And so that's the history of the name, and it's really figuring out how do we marry it to the whiteboarding activities that we're already doing so well and that we know how to do well to figure out how to pick. And so that's the history. And a little bit just a little bit more about what MurderBoarding is, and so how we defined it is it's about making qualitative decisions. So a little bit of background on me is I have an undergrad in econ and then an MBA, and I've been really used to analytical tools that let me make good decisions, but they're almost always quantitative. And when it came down to decisions that were soft in nature, that had more variables, and it was really unclear sort of what mattered more than other things, so what were the views or knowledge or things that needed to form that decision, it's been really hard to make those decisions. And so MurderBoarding was invented with a client to help them go through and make a really tough qualitative decision, which of course in business today, most of what we get to do in terms of setting direction and innovation is not something that you can put necessarily in an Excel spreadsheet and kind of turn out an answer, but more about of these many things that are incredibly hard and complex and no one else has done before, what is the thing that we most want to do? And sometimes people, just a little bit of context, so sometimes people think about it as, well, isn't every choice a good choice? And in some cases, it's true, they are relatively equal. And in fact, I have a set of Legos in my office, and this is probably a byproduct of me being a kid at heart and having now a 6-year-old. I have a bunch of Legos, and one day I started just building a series of things out of common parts, and I was trying to depict this notion that, and so these are actually in my office for anybody who really wants to play with this, is, oh, hang on, I'm just getting a message saying feedback. So let me see if I can, is that better, Mike?
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, let's try it. So when we think about are all the choices the same, the graphics I have on screen are the speedster, the helicopter, the biplane, and in some ways they are all the same in the sense that they can get somebody from here to there. But the choice of which one is better amongst those choices really matters on what your goal is. So a helicopter might hold 2 people, and it might be great for going up a hill, but a speedster might be great if you have a long, flat road. And the way this applies to business, of course, is given your market conditions or your competitive state or the state of the market itself in terms of, are you an early entrant or a late player, it would change what you need. So do you need 50 people to all go in the same direction? Do you need them to go fast, or do you need them to go high? Would actually change which of the choices would matter most. And the reality is, it might be fine in some really simple decision to choose any one of these, right? Pretty good, good enough kind of thing. And then if something really matters to the sake of the direction of the business, and it's crucial to get right, then MurderBoarding is really the tool set that we can use. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say to that. Okay, so So our agenda for today is to basically talk about what makes tough choices today, sort of what's causing us to not be good at this thing today, just so we kind of understand some context, so that we can then talk about what murderboarding can serve. Then I want to dive deeper into how to do it. And of course, O'Reilly has allowed us to release the chapter of content around that, so there's also details. I'm going to talk to it. And then I'm going to spend some time mostly on tips, tricks, and tools so that I can talk about it more, again, in context, and then just kind of picking it back up to why it matters, because murderboarding was written in context to a larger framework. And for the purpose of today's discussion, I thought it might be fun if we instead of using a business context, right, because I saw all the bios of people kind of coming in. Some people are coming more from an engineering background or more from a marketing background and so on across the different spectrum of industries. I thought maybe we could actually choose an example that would apply to everyone. And for the fun story today, and you guys hopefully will relate to this, is how do we plan a family vacation? And just to kind of bring it back to this notion of, complexity versus simplicity. So if you were a single person, just on your own, trying to plan a vacation, what you might pick is entirely dependent on sort of what your mood is. Do I want a helicopter day? Do I want a speedster day? Where do I want to go? Is it a Hawaii? Is it a Patagonia kind of trip? Whatever it is. And then as you get into couplehood and you start having that kind of orientation, you actually need to at least negotiate with one other person, or ideally negotiate with one other person about what is the kind of best trip that makes a vacation. As you add perhaps a couple kids into that mix, again, you have a level of complexity, but to the degree that you care about their opinion or whatever is a sort of family profile. The kind of thing that murderboarding is typically applied to is when you're trying to plan a family reunion with 100 people, meaning grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins, wild generational differences, and economic differences. And so when I am using that as a sort of personal example, in business that would be, hey, we're a $1 million business trying to get to be a $50 million business, which is the right direction. We're a $200 million business figuring out how to break the $1 billion mark, or we're a $2 billion division trying to reinvent ourselves. So complexity is when this matters. And so as I give the examples, I'm going to try to go back to this family vacation story, and I hope we have some fun with it as we go along talking about grandma. Okay, so our agenda, so tough choices. So how a lot of really complex decisions get made today in the boardroom, in the executive suite, and this is actually from a piece of research, is most decisions get made with as many as 3 choices, even when it's the most significant threat or opportunity for that business. So this is a McKinsey study that I'm referencing. CEOs and the exec team typically look at no more than 3 choices, and they look at no more out than 2 years in terms of horizon. And they basically pick that most obvious choice in a relatively small window of time. And one of the reasons, and if those execs, it was interesting, a little double-click question on it, if asked would they do it differently the next time, those execs said, I would actually do it with less time and with less thinking about it. And there's a reason why, right? There's a human condition or human behavior as to why we're actually inclined that way. And I thought it might just help to understand those reasons a little bit more as we think about what do we need to fix for. And first is, a lot of executives that I work with say, hey, if I talk to everyone, and perhaps some of you guys feel that way as project managers, if I talk to everyone, I'm going to dilute what it is we ultimately pick. And, the notion is too many cooks spoil the broth, and I really don't want to dilute our thinking. The second reason that people often don't involve a lot of people or often don't create a lot of options, either one, is they want to go fast. And they understand this whole notion that groups move fundamentally slowly. And so they think, okay, well, it would be a matter of, I have to make a really tough decision. I need to make it yesterday, not tomorrow. And if I ask a bunch of people or look at more options, all I'm going to do is hurry up and wait. That's a business reality. And the third reason is if lots of people are involved, don't we also start choosing something that is the lowest common denominator play instead of the thing that is best? So if you kind of apply reasons 1, 2, and 3 back to the family situation, it's saying, hey, listen, I really don't want to listen to everyone's opinion because we're going to end up on some bad barge cruise in in the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to have to take 3 months to plan it instead of a week. And, oh my God, I really don't want this much discussion and email trail, et cetera, in my life. So there's a sort of tension of I don't really want to involve a lot of people, and I don't really want to take a lot of time in that process. So in recognizing that's a reality for at least executives, we just really want to think about if we're going to change things, what would we need to change for? And my fundamental bias, and this will come through in everything I'm going to say today, so it's important for me to step back, is that winning rarely ever happens because a small group of people makes a decision and tells everyone else what to do. So inside the organizational context, the work that I get a chance to do every day, it's typically not about the top of the executive chain telling the bottom of the organization, hey, go do that, go this direction. Every time I've seen a team set direction that way, that's typically the team that fails. Because the group that owns the business, who's actually sort of running the business today, they have their own point of view, their own perspective that perhaps wasn't considered when they weren't listened to. And they typically don't engage the idea. I mean, if there's no sort of way for them to chew on it and understand how to make it their own, then they sort of make their best attempt at it, but it usually doesn't lead to success. And that gap between the top of the organization and the bottom, that is what I call an air sandwich. And anytime we have an air sandwich inside an organization, all this sort of understanding and communication and connection and trade-offs and such don't happen. And that's the belief that winning or good choices resides, in the group so that everyone can end up in a place where they're, in the family vacation story, enjoying their experience in business, actually getting to the same outcome. So we know also as people we can have many options. So I'm going to switch a little bit. So now I'm talking about sort of how executives think about making decisions and how hard that is. I'm just going to switch to the individual side of things because we as individuals in our personal life or business life definitely have the same challenge. So we can have many options, but until we eliminate some, it's really hard to have both clarity and focus. So as long as we have sort of a few things on the table, we're never really picking. And usually what's happening is we're diluting our efforts. We're pursuing all three things at sort of 33% each, instead of figuring out what is the one thing that we really need to push on. And so the tools I'm hoping that we share today and the process methodology and stuff is really about how do you know what to pick so that you can have that kind of clarity and focus. And there are sort of 6 reasons why each of us as individuals get stuck too. And first is, and this is, again, I'm going to try to tie it back to the family vacation story. First is, I already know the answer or what to do, so just let me pick. And so this is the sort of person who's organizing the party as, I already know, hey, Grandma, I really don't care about your opinion. Kids, I really don't care if you want to go to Disneyland. Just let me pick, right? And I've been to the Greek islands before. I know you'll love it. That's sort of the tone of familiarity. And all of us want to do this at some level, especially because, first of all, it's easier. And second of all, we usually are familiar. If we've raised our hand to, let's say, organize a family reunion, we're usually opinionated enough about travel. And in business, we're usually opinionated enough about what it is we're leading that we want to just be able to go, hey, let me just make that call. And then the second reason why we sometimes don't involve a lot of people or go through a really discerning process around qualitative decisions is I've already made a commitment that it will be done by some period of time. So it's typically like, hey, I said I would get that done by February. It's now January, and even though the decision is way more complex than I anticipated when I first signed up, I feel like I have to meet the commitment I've already made, and so I'm going to take this sort of stance of got to get going. Another one is I should already know what to do, and I call that the expert halo. And again, really smart people tend to carry this one with them wherever they go, which is I should already know. I should already know what people want is sometimes an underlying bias when I work with teams of I should already know the answer or I should already know what other people want and therefore be able to just make the call. And in the family vacation story, it's I already know, I love this family, I know this family, I know what they want, right? That would be the translation. Sometimes people get stuck in making tough qualitative decisions because they figure, hey, there's an answer somewhere if I just go pursue it. And this is actually the quant part of us who figures if we can go and research it enough, right? So this is the person who would have a whole bunch of catalogs on their desk table and really just be looking at it over and over again. Conformity. So conformity is a really common human condition where we say, I'll do what anyone else has done. So, hey, I heard this, other person that goes to school with my kids, she organized a family reunion and she did it in Tahoe and they really liked it. And why don't we just go ahead and do that because it's really easy to do kind of thing, or it's already been done that way so I know what hotels to book or what activities to do. And then the last one, and it's probably the one that I hear the most when I'm thinking about business decisions is, hey, listen, we just don't have the time. We don't have the time to talk about it some more, so let's just go ahead and pull the trigger is the most common phrase I hear in business. And that's perfectly fine, again, if it's a really simple thing, but if your direction of your business or your direction of your personal life is sort of hanging in the line here, you really want to have a little bit more sophisticated of a process. And so when designing the murder board process, the things that it's organized around is how do you do it fast, because you've heard that as a really common thread as sort of part of the problem. How do you do it with wisdom from any or many? So how do you do it so that you draw on the experience set and the perspective of anyone who really needs to play a role in it, or in an organizational context with people who will actually go make it real. They know something, especially in today's day and age. A lot of people inside organizations know a lot more, the combination of that sort of collective wisdom, what Clay Shirky talks about when he says, here comes everybody. Third thing is you want to do it in such a way that doesn't get a diluted solution, and there's a very particular piece of behaviors and stuff that need to be considered so that you don't go down this sort of track of let's just choose whatever everyone sort of most commonly agrees to. And then how do you still get to a clear decision with an end point? And so that's what the framework is really designed around. Oh, hang on, I see a note. So explain what an expert halo is.
Nilofer, on that same thing, I had a question on that. The smart halo, the smartest person in the meeting. I think we've all been to a meeting where someone seems to reserve the right to be the smartest person in that meeting.
Yeah.
How do you suggest dealing with them and, working with them?
So the first thing to know is that we've all done it, right? So have empathy for the person who's doing it right now. And because we all want to be viewed as an expert. It's quite often what we've been hired for or trained for, etc. And so have some empathy for that person. The thing is that when that person is doing, or when we're doing it, when we are taking that role of I should already know and I should be that knowledgeable, you're actually putting on a very particular stance, and it's a stance I call in the book the chief of answers. Then, and meaning I should already know, and as soon as you take on the stance of chief of answers, what you've done to everybody else in the room is you've made them the tribe of doing things. You've just created this disconnect and this sort of hierarchical difference between one party and another. And I have yet to see in today's business case where someone really knows the full solution. We had a case the other day where this senior vice president was talking about a mobile data solution, and was just absolutely convinced he knew the answer for what to build next, and it was really about a product portfolio decision, and was sort of trying really hard to be the most knowledgeable chief of answer person in the room. And there was an outside member from Google there, and Google, of course, has a completely different perspective on mobile data than someone who's already in the business, and he just asked 3 questions. And in asking 3 questions, 3 very open-ended questions without judging it, the guy kind of had to tilt his head a little bit to the right and go, I don't know that. And the minute we can acknowledge, right, we don't know everything and there's more to be done here, there's more discovery to be had, more conversation to be done, that's when we can individually give up the expert halo and we can also move forward. Because the goal isn't to have one person know it all. The goal is to have everyone co-own that solution. So when they walk out of the room, they don't go, hey, whatever Joe said over there, or whatever Mike said over there, I'm going to ignore everything we just talked about, and I'm going to go do the opposite thing. Because that's what causes businesses to fail, right, is that passive-aggressive, I didn't really get to weigh in, and therefore I haven't really bought into the solution. And then besides, I have some piece of data he never really asked me, and then I'm going to therefore not follow. And so you're going to have this situation where if you don't engage the topic as equals, where everyone has something to offer, some wisdom to contribute, some perspective, some insights, then you'll also have this opportunity where people can sort of walk away and sort of sabotage the effort, right? Not that I'm saying that it's sort of its worst thing. Nobody actually consciously tries to do that, but inadvertently try to do it. Okay, so Mike, you're watching all the questions that are coming in, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No, I'm starting to read them, and I'm like, no, I can't. So did I answer the question, Mike?
Yes, I think you did. The last question on that was, though, how do you sell this up the organization to do it fast? So the Heather Young question about most of the time it's my bosses who say, you know, and you need to do it fast. And will you address selling this up the organization?
Yes, let me give the answer right now, and I'm going to talk about it some more, too. So
Okay.
the bottom line is you got to be able to say, hey, is this like a crucial thing? Like if we get it wrong, we're going to mess up and we're going to fall off the cliff, or is it something that will cost us a year in the market, or whatever the ramification is? You kind of just think it through and go, God, if we get this wrong, how it plays out could cost us $2 million, whatever the cost or time or impact is. And you go, could we take 2 weeks and actually just really make sure we double-click down on it? There's not an executive around who doesn't go, oh, yeah, that's kind of a big one. Yeah, go ahead and take the 2 weeks, right? And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about make it fun by making sure it ends. I'm going to hopefully cover that a little bit more in detail. Good question. Okay. So when to use MurderBoarding. So I think I've talked about it has to be fast, it has to be all these other things. When to use it. So places where this has worked for us in the past, and I've seen other teams apply it. First of all, is there a new market you're going after, and who do I want to sell to? So often there's quite a number of people that could be sold a product, right? So it's often like when we're thinking about what to build or who to market to, teams will start with, hey, we have 4 customers for this. And I'm like, typically, you don't have 4 customers. You typically have one that's the best customer, and so who is that party you want to sell to? Or if we're building a product, if we have, again, 100 features that we could build, what are the ones that really are going to matter the most? We've worked with a team where they were actually going out, they were a $50 million team, and they were figuring out how to get another round of money. And they didn't really know what their next thing was that they wanted to sort of get funding for. So they had several different ideas they could pursue. Some could be done through organic growth. Some needed additional funds. And so they were really trying to isolate what was it that needed additional funding, was sort of more compelling so they could go out and raise another round. A really common one is just if a team is absolutely spinning, and I hope I don't need to define that, but if I do, let me know. If it's spinning amongst themselves, they're like, we don't really know where to go, and we're pursuing too many options. And they're just sort of, you can kind of feed them circling around one another. This is usually a good tool to kind of bring a team together with a great deal of clarity and focus. Another one is if you need really broad agreement. So if you need a big division of people to move in a particular direction. We had a guy take over, oh gosh, I'm trying to camouflage the details. So one of the mobile OS teams, and this OS had been around for a while. It had probably 700, 800 people already in the team when he joined, and he was asked by the CEO of the company to come in and do the quote-unquote turnaround because the OS wasn't really accomplishing what it originally meant to. So he had this charter, quote-unquote charter, from the exec team, but as he went and met with these 800 people who supposedly reported to him, they were like, yeah, whatever, I've got these things on my list, and until you tell me any different, I'm going to keep pursuing them. He couldn't even get them to, have a conversation about how do we get more effective. And what he needed to do is actually pull them together and help them to reach a really broad agreement about what do they stop doing, because what they would tell him when he first started conversations is, my plate's already full. Why would I even want to listen to you? And they were that frank about it because, of course, engineering teams typically are. And he was really he had a great opportunity then to kind of bring them together and say, okay, what does it mean when we give up certain things, or what does it mean about where we want to go so we can give up certain things? Okay, so those are some good use cases. In the family situation, right, it's you want a whole bunch of people to have a lot of fun, to go to a place, not complain, feel economically whole at the end of the experience, where you're looking for an experience that unites that family so that they actually want to get together for the second family reunion versus never want to see each other again. So then, of course, I'm not sure how many people know Hugh McLeod already from the web world. Hugh has done some of the art for the book, and I just have so much fun with it that I just thought I'd throw this in here. So MurderBoarding is not how many good ideas you have, it's how many good ideas you kill, and he has the evil cat. That's our little momentary pause there. All right. So there are 4 specific steps. So I've sort of laid out the argument for why people have a tough time making these choices today and what we need to actually account for. Now I just want to double-click down on what the 4 steps are, and then I'm going to go to tools and techniques. So there are 4 specific steps to MurderBoarding. And I drew them very non-hierarchically because there's actually a relationship that starts to flow between these. MurderBoarding is never as neat as, step 1, step 2, step 3. And although it has some serialness to it, it tends to also have its own organic nature, as most of life actually does. So first of all, before you can do MurderBoarding, you got to know what problem you're trying to solve. So I'm just going to kind of point that out in case it's not really obvious. You need to know that. And then the first step that you need to take is know what matters to this entity. And I'm going to say for this organization, right, for a business organization, is it money? Is it about revenues? Is it about growth goal? Is it about achieving a particular outcome with a particular customer set? So what is the thing that really matters? It could be, what is the vision for this? It could be, what's really important for us to succeed? It could be, what do we believe we can change or not? So the first step is about deciding what matters to us. And here's the challenge with that is quite often people have belief systems about what really matters to us, and they don't know how to say that. So we were working with a team where we kept coming up with options, and they kept, in some way, shape, or form, not actually moving forward on those options. And we finally said, okay, what is it you're not telling us? So let's dig deeper. And it turns out they wouldn't consider any option that didn't work with the channel. Because in their business, this tacit belief had been for the longest time, if we don't work with the channel, we'll kill ourselves. And so they had actually set that as a boundary condition, but it was so organic to that business, so built into their DNA, they couldn't even see it anymore. And so one of the things about knowing how to sort through options is figuring out, okay, what really matters. And so having that conversation actually independently of choices is really kind of a fun conversation. So what really matters in our family vacation could be that it's all about no more than $500 a head, right? It could be about a cost model. It could be about, we got to make sure everyone has at least one big social interchange. It could be somebody says, what really matters to us is we get one great picture, right, so that we're all together in the same room and we have this picture to record it. Whatever that specific criteria is, either for the family vacation or for business, it's getting clear on that. And the reason I make that first and not after you've already got options and stuff and trying to call that out is because sometimes we can get really caught up in lobbying for a particular choice or an option if we don't know what is the trade-off criteria. And so sometimes we can talk about trade-off criteria much more cleanly if we're not doing it in context with the specific options, right? So I might really like Hawaii, and I might be steering everything towards Hawaii in the family vacation story. But if I can step back and go, I want to make sure everybody is financially whole at the end of this stuff and it's not too expensive for them and we've got to keep the cost no more than $500 a head, I might agree to that in absence of my Hawaii preference, right? And really agree to that. And then if it turns out, we can't get to Hawaii for $500 a head kind of thing, then I'm going to be like, that's right, but my winning criteria was really about money. Then I'm willing to kind of throw my personal favorite overboard a little bit more easily because I'm really clear what the vision is, what's really important. That's the first one. And that's probably actually the hardest one of all the ones I'm talking about, because getting people to talk about what matters is just getting them slightly outside their comfort zone. Most times people walk in the room ready to lobby for a particular idea. And so getting people to go, whoa, before we kind of, get in that mode, can we step it back just a second and say what really matters? That's the moment where you're kind of slowing down and you're asking for that wisdom to come into the room. Uh-oh. So somebody just walked into a conference room. Second thing that we want to do then is sort options. So you want to sort options that you've either generated now for how to best solve that problem, or ones that perhaps you've been carrying on the sidelines for a while. And there's a bunch of ways to do that. In fact, one of the things that I did in the book, The New How, I had so much sort of a challenge was kind of like, do I dive deep here or not? Because some people really are great at idea generation, so they didn't need more help, or some are not. So I actually built into the appendix some tools. So just a quick one that can potentially help people. I like Tom Kelly's work he's done with the 6 Phases of Innovation. He's got some great ideas about how to generate ideas. You can do it obviously online in things like Google Spreadsheets where everyone just types ideas. You can do it in wikis. If you're in an in-person room, you can do it on Post-its, right? And depending on the complexity of the situation and how much you believe people have, quote-unquote, ownership of that issue, you can do it blind, meaning submit all the options independently of knowing who is nominating that option, or you can do it fully open, like everyone really knowing and transparent about what that is. And what's important is that people understand each option fully before they rule it out. So the sort function is really about, let's make sure we understand one another, right? Quite often someone will lobby for, hey, I want to go do blah, blah, blah. And like in the case of, I really want to go to Hawaii, I may actually be trying to tell you something different. I may actually try to tell you that the reason I'm holding on to Hawaii is because they have this very low-key style of being in Hawaii. And what I'm really trying to say when I'm saying Hawaii is as much about this low-key sort of style and approach. I don't want to go to the Ritz-Carlton. I want to go to this place that has this sort of more down-to-earth tone. But if you didn't click down as to why Hawaii was important for me, you may never learn that. In fact, I may never even express it, right? Because it's just sort of a feeling or thought, less a sort of clearly articulated idea. So as we put options on the table, one of the things to do is to ask people, hey, can you explain how come that one's on your list? Or what about that? Can you explain it more? And quite often when we're working with businesses, we find teams like marketing teams versus engineering teams use really common language to describe entirely different things. And so getting the click down to go, hey, what is that? You know, can you kind of describe it with some more words, more fidelity, and people can go, oh, that's not what I meant by that, right? I meant this. And we're using slightly different words, so understanding one another is really important in that sort option. The third thing you want to do, let's say in the family vacation story, again, just trying to stick with that for continuity, is to say, okay, so we've decided it's really about a locally environment that makes sure that we have water nearby, and it looks like that best choice is not going to be Hawaii, but it's going to be about Florida because it's a little bit easier for everybody to get to, blah, 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 right? So you'll sort of have some fidelity. And then you want to go back and say, hey, what was the original thing we were aiming for? Just kind of go back to the original sort of problem you're trying to solve. And so if you come up with a family reunion with 100 people that's now, you started to create a solution that looks like it might work, you just want to go back to the original premise of, is it intergenerational? Will, people come? And a way in the family situation you probably test that out is just tying it back and saying, hey, listen, we heard these following things were really important to people. It looks like this choice is sort of the predominant winner. Is there anything, does that really work for people? Is there anything else we're missing? And in an organizational context, you might come up with an option to say, hey, we're going to go pursue this market or build this product. You want to just cycle back with people about, is that really solving the core problem? And quite often in that cycle back, that sort of process of testing, you're going to learn something, right? So you might learn that in the family situation, hey, the euro is a lot stronger. In the conversion, we have a bunch of family in Europe, and so actually we don't need to stay as limited to the $500 situation. We might actually really want to be able to consider a higher expense piece because that was the original group. And so it's in that sort of fidelity of going back and testing things and sharing with people what were the original criteria, what were the options that you went through, here was therefore what looks like the solution to it. People kind of, the more you can articulate and extrapolate out the sort of fidelity of the understanding, then that group can go, ah, got it, or no, I didn't really mean that, I meant this, or, oh, there's a new piece of insight, right? We can't do this, the economy's sour, I lost all my stock, whatever. And so what you're looking for is finding a way for people to build on top of that. It's in that test phase that you usually find out something you didn't know that allows you to then go back to another sort. That's why I say it's kind of messy and it has to stay messy for a little while, because until you've actually tested against your original premise and shared really explicitly what mattered to people and sort of gave people a last running chance at it, right? And one of the things that I do during this phase as a leader, as a facilitator of the process, is I go, hey, listen, this is the time for you to call it. And if you haven't said what it is that you need to say, and we haven't heard you, like if we've said this is the core criteria, and you violently disagree with it, this is your last chance. And I had a CFO I was working with recently where she was literally like doing this thing where she was crossing her arms and coming to all the meetings, but you could kind of tell she really wasn't engaged because she kept crossing her arms, sort of crossing her legs. If there was another part of her body she could have crossed, I think she would have done it. And she was really not participating. And I think she won sort of that veto power later. And so I was just calling her forward to it. You know, I've noticed you're not really participating very much, and so it's perfectly fine to me if it's like you don't have an opinion. But if you have an opinion and you haven't said it, now's the time, or it's one of those sort of final moments. And that's usually when you get people to kind of say anything that needs to be said, or this is why they're really going to fail. At that point, you typically end up with a slightly different solution. So just, you know, it's all the reality of all of us linear thinkers are like, I've got what matters, we've sorted the pile, and now let's go back and kind of choose. It's actually this phase that kind of goes back and go, let's go back and make sure that maybe we consider more options, you know, whatever it is, so that we end up with something that we can actually have work. And that's really basically like a test drive, right? So testing is really like a test drive to the organization, but it's also a test drive for what else don't we know to make it real. And right before a team goes into execution, they usually discover something about why something won't work or will work, and this is the time in which to uncover it. That way you don't sort of click go and then come back 3 months later and go, oh, by the way, we found out that really won't work. This is the time to go ask those cross-silo questions if it's within a business. And then, of course, the final phase is to pick. And so pick or choose. And, sometimes I call it kill, right? Whatever it is, you're really going through this process saying, this is it. And more importantly, and this is the most important part if you hear nothing else, you got to figure out what's not on the list. So how do we park the things that haven't been chosen? And how do we say, hey, listen, this was chosen and these were not for the following reasons, and park it. And I say park rather than kill at times. It just depends on, sort of mood and style and stuff. If a team is really wanting to be decisive, it's really important to say these we're killing. Like if a team's been churning for a long time. If a team really is high functioning and might want to come back to some of those options because let's say they get more money and they can pursue a second option, then it's really park. And so it's finding which tone and which style works for each organization. So I want to take a moment now that I kind of walk through the 4 steps to take any questions.
Oh, Nilofer, well, I've got one for you. There's many organizations that are nonprofit or not-for-profit, and they're kind of driven by consensus. The government is kind of like that in certain situations. Academic institutions are like that. When you have an environment that's really consensus-driven, is MurderBoarding as easy to do in those environments?
It's actually very easy to do. Here's why. Because you actually have a group of people that wants to walk out of that room in high alignment. But the norm in a lot of nonprofits and in government organizations is they typically don't know how to have tension in the room. Their normal attribute, again, I'm going to do a really, really broad overgeneralization, and I apologize for that, is we've often been taught not to deal with tension, like our higher attribute is what's going to get along versus we're going to make the right call. And so when we work with nonprofits, one of the things we can just say to them is, hey, listen, is it all right for us to have challenge in the room? Do we want the best solution, or do we want one that we all feel good about? And if you ask that question, it's just such a funny question, right? It's so obvious. If you ask that question that neutrally, people will go, no, I want to go have the best solution. And then you can get people to that place of let's go have that tough conversation and let's get to that place where it's actually the right thing for us rather than what's the easiest thing we can agree to. So in some ways, this actually enables that conflict conversation to happen in a really healthy way that most nonprofits and most government organizations don't know how to do very well.
Okay, good.
Anything else?
Well, yeah, there was one other one here that I thought was kind of interesting, is about the motivation of people maybe wanting to avoid work or responsibility, or, maybe the pressure of owning that responsibility, that sort of thing. Does that kind of MurderBoarding address, the point of failure?
Oh, yeah. So there are people who show up in the room and don't engage very well. And my only rule, and I ask the group to kind of go and kind of vote in, I'll put it on the table, but it's a group decision, is, listen, if you don't play and so on, then you have no right no right whatsoever to complain about it later. Is that a deal? And it's such a funny thing, right? Because as soon as you say that to a group, you're like, oh, you get the guy who's actually thinking, I'm just going to let this happen and then I'll get it later. He basically has fair warning. And then it also allows an organization to sort of see that. So it starts to kind of have its own normalizing effect. Okay. Anything else, Mike?
No.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So, of course, I feel like I've both done a really deep job and a not-so-deep job. So with that in mind, I did want to point out that the chapter with as much fidelity as we shared in the book is definitely got sort of a step-by-step plan. And so that bit.ly that I've got now on screen is a really good one just to go be able to download the chapter. There's no space between the lines, even though that's how it looks like formatted on the bit.ly. Okay. And thank you, O'Reilly, for allowing that content to be free. I really appreciate that. Okay. So one of the things that we were just talking about is the necessary tension, right? So here, again, another great piece of art from Hugh, and it's a little bit oblique, so let me explain what I think it means. So here's a manager or leader of a group who's asking questions, so anyone have any questions, and yet he's not actually looking at his people. You know, sort of like, can I go through the process of asking, hey, any questions, but not actually give a shit, excuse my language, and move right along. We've all seen this in leadership teams. We've probably all done it ourselves, right, where we're like, hey, we've got 5 more minutes to go. So any questions? You know, after, and the rest of the people in the room are like, oh, dear God, that is failure, right? That is just a sure sign, and what they've just heard is not going to work. And the thing about MurderBoarding, the thing that's built into the process, is that you've got to engage both sides. The person who's sitting in the chair, who's an individual contributor, has got to engage, and we've all been that party where we stare at that crack in the ceiling hoping that we didn't get called on to actually say bullshit on something. And again, excuse my language, West Coast behavior on my part today. And then we've always, you know, each of us has probably been the guy who kind of like is in a hurry and kind of want to move on. Both parties need to really take accountability for the tension and face it up front. Face it in the sense of go and actually have the conversation, go and actually say, hey, this is last call when we're about to do the test. Go and say, hey, I haven't heard you play, but if you don't play in this game, we're all going to lose. And that's actually built into the model, but it requires, of course, a certain amount of being able to deal with tension, a certain amount of being able to deal with sort of truth-telling, right? And there's a couple of great tools that are out there about how to tell the truth really sort of openly and stuff, and how to kind of get people to raise issues, about how to have candid conversations. And that's really the kind of skills that you need, that's sort of embedded into the process and really needs to be there in order for MurderBoarding to work. Anything, Mike, you want to add to that? Because you usually love this content.
Yes, I was just checking the bit.ly, though. Someone's mentioned that it hasn't, it is running. It's fine.
Okay. And the bit.ly, by the way, is it's case sensitive, and
yes, it is.
Yeah, and it downloads a file, so it's really hard to tell it just did something. So
yes, it's a PDF. It's downloading.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, good. So just a quick story, and then I'm going to move on to tools. So one of the reasons why I love this process, and I think I was really inspired, is my grandfather. So my grandfather named me, so Nilofer is a Persian name, and he named all of his grandchildren. He has a really close relationship with it, with all of us in that way, in a very sort of funny way. And he was a really crotchety guy, and he was a judge in addition to being a poet. So the name Nilofer means, a lotus flower is a Persian poetic name. And but the reason that so in the local area in Ahmedabad where he lived, the role a judge plays is as much sort of a local role as it is a state level. And so people would sort of line up on a Saturday morning to come settle disputes, and they would just line up in whatever order they showed up that morning. And when my grandfather was done drinking his tea and doing all the stuff, he would put me on his lap and then let the servant come let people in. And each disputing party would come sit on this long dining room table on either side and kind of get a chance to have questions asked and answered, and to then, he would just keep double-clicking down on what that situation was. And the thing was that almost always in his inquiry of that process, he would learn something for himself that neither party really understood before that moment. And it was in the inquiry that learning happened. And I loved watching him kind of go through that process because he would just know so much more about the situation and the options and sort of what was really going on before he ultimately made his ruling. And the other part about that, and the reason I wanted to tell the story in the context of murderboarding, is in the Hindi language there's this word which, I'll just say, chup. And the way you sort of say it is that sort of very, very sharp tone. And it effectively means shut up, although nobody would actually say that. It's sort of a be quiet, but the sort of slang version is shut up. And he would say when he was done listening to everyone's options and he had heard what really mattered in the situation, he would then ultimately say, chup, and he would make a ruling. And that ruling was largely what everyone lived by. You didn't go there not wanting to listen to his ruling. And so I think the fun part about murderboarding really is that you go through this process, and it takes anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks, depending on the complexity of the business. But at some point, you get to say that thing. Choop, we're done. Make a call. Let's go. And that's the norm that when it does start to work inside business, is you start to create a norm where you're like, hey, we made that call. And unless the criteria really changed, the market condition really changed, something, we don't need to go back and revisit that. Like, we're done. Let's go. And so I'd like for you all hopefully back on that lesson about how do we actually make that as a norm in business where we have the healthy debate up front, but then when we made the call, we really make the call.
Yes, and can you talk a little bit about, okay, so while we're making the call, while we're making the decisions, a little bit that goes into deciding the qualitative versus quantitative aspects that you're using? I mean, is it a mix, or how do you make the right blend?
Everything I've described so far is really a qualitative process, Mike. And because there are ways in which data can support a decision like this, but what I'm really trying to do is say this is a way to make a qualitative tough call.
Good.
And in a sense, like the numbers, I was using the family vacation example, where numbers might inform that. It's certainly a part, but it's usually most complex decisions that we see, at least in the setting direction, innovation kind of process that we see with companies. It's typically more a qualitative set of tough calls where it's entirely about judgment, subjectivity, interpretation, less about a particular point of fact.
Okay, and also one other thing that I found interesting on the questions here, does this, the murderboarding, does it rely on trust in an organization? Because, oftentimes the staff or the line may not trust management, and then management may not trust, that things will be implemented correctly and that sort of thing. So does this rely heavily on trust?
I think it's built into the process that essentially trust affects everything, right? If you don't believe a leader is actually going to be able to actually listen to your point of view, are you going to raise your point of view? Probably not. But the model is basically built so that you have a set of norms built into it that allows you to start to build trust and really go forward. If an organization is highly dysfunctional, I don't think this would work, but I'm not sure anything would work, right? So, but this is much more consistent with complex issues where people want to work together, like the intent is the right direction, and this gives you a framework to make those decisions and actually a way to kind of go through each step. One of the things, I'm going to skip the roles because I want to make sure I cover 2 more things, and is each of us has roles that participate in creating trust. I just wanted to kind of go right there. Is the role of leader is to, I'm just going to go through their role first and then how the collaborator plays with that. One is to facilitate the process. The leader's role is not to be the most opinionated person in the room, and the leader's role is not to be the most argumentative person or the most knowledgeable, right? In this case, for murderboarding, the leader's role is to facilitate the process. If the leader is also a content expert, then I usually recommend that leader step aside and let somebody else lead the process because they can't do both be the content champion and facilitate the process. That's really the most important thing. Second, this leader's role is to seek clarity, not agreement. So at the very beginning and all the way through, you're not going for, hey, do we all agree? It's going for, what did you mean by that? And what does that look like? So asking questions that are much more about inquiry so that people understand one another. What we're looking for is creating a shared understanding with a whole bunch of really smart, bright people engaged. And so you want to ensure that debate happens. And you also want to make sure that the emotionality of things, the logic. So sometimes people will say things, but the look on their face is, I hate everything you've just said, right? So the thing is that if we don't acknowledge someone's emotions as they're coming into the context, they typically can't also let go of whatever it is they're saying and what they're holding on to. So I was just going back to that CFO example I gave a little while earlier where her arms were crossed and, you know, she just clearly wasn't engaging. I took her aside and said, is there something you're not saying in the room? Right, so we had a break. Is there something you're not saying in the room? She says, I don't think we actually have the money to go do these things. And she, as the CFO, was actually highly conscious of a budget issue. And I was like, well, why aren't you saying that? She goes, am I allowed to? I'm like, okay, so how else is everyone going to know, right? And so she was actually in this role where she was in internal tension, where she knew something that she wasn't even sure she should say, because was it public yet? Was the CEO okay sharing it, et cetera? And so she actually needed to understand what was going on within her so she could participate in a more equal way. And it's that leader's role to go find out what's actually going on with that person. And then it's also the leader's role to know what's in or what's out. So at that very end where I said you choose, you know, it's that leader's role to say, hey, we picked X, didn't pick Y and Z, and here's why. It's that leader's role to actually name it, even before they leave the room, to say, hey, I think what we just agreed to is, right, and naming it. And naming it and being the person to kind of say it and really name it helps the team kind of go, oh, yeah, you're right, we really did just make that decision, right, so that there's clarity. And sometimes I've seen leaders walk out of the room really fast, like they think they know, but they didn't repeat it to anybody else, and everybody else walked away with a slightly different interpretation on it, and that's what causes teams to fail. So it's that role of naming stuff. The collaborator's role, and this goes to the trust question, is you're there as a co-thinker. So when I say collaborator, I mean each of us. We're showing up as a collaborator to come solve that problem. So we're co-thinkers, we're shaping the options. It means that we have to be willing to let go of what any particular notion is, right, that we're all in love with. We need to build up ideas, so we don't walk in saying, hey, everybody else's idea is stupid and my idea is the best. We kind of walk in with this, let me put my thing on the table, and let me also figure out how to build on Joe's idea, because maybe Joe isn't articulating it really well or Mike isn't really articulating it really well. How do I take it to the next level? Maybe what they're really trying to say is blah, blah, blah. So building up ideas and asking a ton of questions, right? So when we can understand one another, when we can figure out how to get each other to raise the issues, then we can kind of go, hey, did you really mean to say that? Or does that mean blah, blah, blah? Or is the implication, right, so getting it on the table. And so as we ask questions and have a healthy debate, then we have this place where we walk out of the room with this really clear understanding of what really matters, why did we make this decision, and therefore, how are we going to walk out of the room and make something real, or how are we going to go to the family reunion and have some fun because we all agreed to it together, right? So you're creating cohesion in the way in which you're asking questions and creating that shared understanding. So this is another great opportunity for questions, and I'm aware with 4 minutes left to go, I've done a bad job of managing my time spot, but I did want to do tips and tools if we still have time. Mike?
Yes, go ahead, quickly.
Okay, going. So a couple of 5 quick tools. Parking, not killing is one I already started to talk about. It's finding a way to create a repository where we say it's not about killing. I say that because a lot of times teams will never go back to that piece of paper, but the fact that it was written down makes them feel more comfortable, and they will actually, even in the meeting, let go of their most precious idea if they see it being written down. So finding a way to always be a good recorder and a good repository of all the ideas that were generated is just a great way of getting people to engage. Another one is avoiding antibodies. So you know, the thing is that sometimes leaders walk in and they say what their pet project is kind of thing, and then they don't really. So one of the ways to get people to really buy in and kind of let go of their ideas is to get them to understand what that criteria is. And that avoids antibodies in the system of somebody, you know, kind of continue to hold on to their idea or feel rejected if their ideas are not chosen kind of thing. It's getting them to buy into the criteria and knowing what matters to that organization sooner rather than later. Pronouncing death, so no matter, it's finding a way to do that that's right for your culture and your organization, but somebody needs to say this is what we're not doing. And somebody needs to communicate that out to everybody. And the way that this is not a democracy, this is the important part of MurderBoarding, is we may have gotten input from 500 people, we may have gotten input from 10, it's whatever the right problem is, right? But you need to actually go back and circle back with everyone who participated and say, here's what we chose, here's why we chose, and then here's how we're moving forward. And that lets everyone, even at that final stage, kind of go, yep, we called it. making it fun by making it end. So a lot of people love this process of making a tough choice. I've seen this where they kind of want to take 4 weeks or 6 weeks because it's a really complex decision. It only gets better if you shorten the time. It gets better if you say we're going to do this in a day than if you say we're going to take 2 weeks. It gets better if you can do it in a few hours. The shorter you can make it without losing people, the more fun it is for people. So if you say, you know what, no matter what, we're going to try to make this decision in 2 weeks. It's not going to go on forever. Here's what we're going to do. It really gets people to engage early, engage often, and know it's going to end. If you don't put a time constraint to it, people will actually disengage because they're like, their moment hasn't come kind of feeling, and they can kind of wait. And then cloaking devices. So one of the things that we want to do in all of this is recognize that for each culture, people will or will not reveal what their opinion is. And so you've got to decide for any particular problem or for any particular kind of team, how much do you want to help them cloak their opinion, right? And there's a bunch of great tools, online tools, to be able to say, hey, everybody nominate ideas for how we're going to solve this problem, and you can cloak. And we've had teams, exec teams, who actually don't know how to have healthy debate amongst one another. We've actually taken the stance at times that it would be easier and faster to let them actually do it online in front of each other, like on computers where they're all in the same room, but they're actually having the debate online because they're much more willing to actually kill each other's ideas if they don't know that the guy next to him is the one killing the idea. And so you got to decide when you want to decide to cloak and not. And that's really a judgment call, and it's a really important judgment call to know what to do. So I saw a question, and I'm just going to go back to it. So what are antibodies? So antibodies, people will come in with a pet project, and if you don't choose their pet project, they will then go and try to destroy all the other options in the room. And that is a truth in business, especially if it's a really senior person. And so when I say avoiding antibodies, I'm trying to get to the whole, how does the solution you guys do pick not get rejected down the road? And it's very important, like early on, to say, this is what we decided was important for us, and that's why options B, C, and D weren't chosen and A was. And so the more transparent you get about why, it helps avoid the antibodies, because then later on somebody else can't walk out of the room and say, hey, my option wasn't chosen, I really thought it was a much better choice, right? And we're like, well, the note that got published right after that meeting was it didn't get chosen because it didn't meet criteria. It didn't meet the criteria, and so it kind of avoids the sort of rejection in the system that can sometimes happen. So I realize it's head up, it's 11 o'clock, and sorry for not managing the time better, guys. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Is there anything else that we wanted to do a Q&A on?
Do we have time? I think we don't, actually, but I think there was one that kind of was a theme in here about companies that are afraid to make decisions. They are operated by fear rather than by looking forward in the future. Can you address that for a second?
Sure. I think the one thing is when you can get people to say, hey, listen, if we don't make a good decision on this, it costs us this, this, and this. Although sometimes it's really obvious to us what the risk is or what the cost is, sometimes it's not really clear to other people. And so I would say make the tacit known. So if it's, hey, listen, guys, if we don't spend time figuring out a family reunion model that's really going to work for everybody, we're all going to walk away hating each other. And we're going to all spend the time and money coming together but not really enjoy ourselves. So let's spend the 2 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, right, figuring out why it is, what's going to make this work for us. And as soon as you name the risk issue, it usually gets people to the table for making decisions.
Good. Okay, well, I think that that probably wraps it up for today. This will be online. I'm not sure if Catherine will come back in and tell us about that.
I'm here. I just want to thank you, Nilofer. That was a wonderful presentation. That I know I can see from the discussion that everyone got a lot out of it, and I did too, and I just want to thank you, and I hope that we can have you back in the future to talk to us again.
Thanks, and I hope people will continue the conversation on Twitter or on Facebook. There's a Facebook New How page, and I welcome people also submitting ideas for who's doing this well, and thank you very much.
And thank you, Mike. You did an excellent job moderating. And I also want to thank everyone else who joined in the conversation here. There was a great conversation in the chat room today, and I think that adds a lot to the discussion. Thank you. Mary just posted the Facebook page for the New How. And we will have a recording of this available in a few days, as I said, and we'll send everyone the link for it. if you'd like to keep a copy of the chat room, a lot of people do want to keep that. You can do that just by copying and pasting it. On a Windows PC, you can do select all and copy. I'm afraid on a Mac, it used to be that easy, but now you have to copy the whole thing just using your mouse and paste it into a text file. You should do that right now, because a lot of people say I close out the meeting too quickly, so I'm talking very slowly. So you can do that now and just copy it and paste it into a chat file. If you don't get it for some reason, please email me at webcast@o'reilly.com and I'll send it to you. It's not a problem. So we've just posted some links I think everyone will want to grab, and that's about it. So I'm going to close out the chat room now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.